I'm here to announce the completion of our withdrawal from Afghanistan and the end of the military mission to evacuate American citizens, third country nationals, and vulnerable Afghans. The last C-17 lifted off from Hamid Karzai International Airport on August 30th this afternoon at 3:29 p.m. East Coast time.
2 years ago. 2 years ago today, we ended the 20-year war, conflict, occupation, what do we call it, of Afghanistan. We've been celebrating a lot of horrible anniversaries because of Afghanistan. And let me just pause before I go into these anniversaries. I don't care that this isn't the breaking news of the day. I care about the people who fought there and bled there and died there and then were disgraced by this government, just tossed to the side by this government. I care that we're led by evil people who lied. I care that we've been lied to for 20 years about what happened. I care about the lives, the treasure, the misconduct, the corruption, and I'm not going to let things go. I don't let things go. I don't forget because there's a new flashy news story every single morning and I just let something go. It's exactly what they want. August 15th, 2 years ago, Taliban took over. August 26th, 2 years ago, suicide bomber murks 13 of our brave men and women, our brave service members. August 29th, in response to our 13 warriors dying, we drone strikes 10 innocent people, 7 of them children, as we were leaving Afghanistan. And today was the day we got out. And this man was and is the commander-in-chief who presided over all of it.
I'm not supposed to take any questions, but go ahead.
Mr. President, on Afghanistan?
I'm not going to answer Afghanistan now.
Can you give facilities
Okay.
to the airport, sir?
Right.
I'm not supposed to take any questions. Oh, Afghanistan? No, I'm not doing that. Hey, which direction am I supposed to walk? Oh, we'll get to old politicians here in just a few segments on the show. So that brings us to 9/11. Obviously, we're coming up on the anniversary of 9/11. Joe Biden won't be in New York City for the anniversary of 9/11. Joe Biden will instead be up in Alaska. Now, that does matter. Why is Joe Biden not in New York City for 9/11? Or in the very least, standing at the Pentagon? Well, because Joe Biden doesn't care. That's really what it comes down to. We are now led, it's not just Democrats either, it's not just Joe Biden, but we are, as a nation, we are led by people with no patriotism. None. Many of them actually hate the country, and that's obviously really bad, but it's almost worse than that. There's just nothing that stirs inside of these people when you talk about America. The way it stirs inside of you, the way it stirs inside of me when we're at a football game. Maybe you're going to a football game. High school football is firing it up this Friday night. Maybe you're going to stand up there and put your hand over your heart as they sing the national anthem. And when they hit that land of the free note, even if you don't cry, I don't cry. I get close sometimes, though. It gets me. It's important for all of us to understand that feeling you get, that feeling I get. It's not in these people at all. When the President of the United States of America, you know what? Sit by the side for a moment. If you were tasked with greeting the families of the 13 warriors who died as they pulled their bodies off of a plane and their parents are seeing a covered casket for the first time where their son, where their daughter now lies, what would you be like with the families? You'd be wonderful. I know you would. Maybe you would cry with them. I know you would hug them. You would thank them for their sacrifice. Tell them what heroes their children were. That's how you would respond because you have this feeling inside of you about America and honoring the service to it. Did you see this latest from this Gold Star father who described how the commander-in-chief conducted himself?
2 years has gone by, and where are we? To be frank, we're knee-deep in is where we are. Everyone who held a key position in the military still has that position or has been promoted. Not a single person has been held accountable. Our so-called leader can't seem to even utter their names in public, and there couldn't be anything more disgusting and cowardly than the way you have treated us. You are a disgrace to this nation. You have no business having ultimate command over our military, and I regret not saying that to your face when I had the opportunity in Dover. I felt it more important to bite my tongue, but I also had more important things on my mind at that time, like receiving my son's lifeless body stateside. While I stood there on the tarmac, watching you check your watch over and over again, all I wanted to do was shout out, "It's 2:30. But out of respect to the other grieving families, I bit my tongue once again. Well, as you could probably tell by now, I'm done biting my tongue. You, sir, stole their lives, their futures, their dreams, and have ripped apart 13 families. You cannot even man up and admit that."
Joining me now to discuss that and other things, my friends James Hasson, Jerry Dunleavy, authors of the book that is sweeping this country by the grace of God. People are reading it. Kabul, if you want to honor these people, honor our warriors, honor their sacrifice and find out who failed them, go pick it up. Highly recommend it. They're not just friends of mine, they're excellent authors. Okay, James, Abbey Gate. That man's son, obviously, you just can't even imagine the anger and heartbreak he's going through. But Abbey Gate did not have to happen. It wasn't inevitable, was it, James?
No, it absolutely wasn't. And one thing that we reveal in Kabul is that there were several different opportunities to prevent this from happening. And to start chronologically, the very first mistake was giving up Bagram. And I know, Jesse, you and I talked about this a little bit on your show a few weeks back. But one thing that we didn't talk about was that the ISIS suicide bomber who killed 13 Americans, wounded 45 more, killed 200 Afghans, was in prison at a prison at Bagram Air Base. And he had been arrested by the CIA in 2017, and he was released by the Taliban on August 15th. So that's step one. Step two is that we, and by we I mean the military and the intelligence community, we're tracking an ISIS-K cell. And the military put together a targeting package and asked for permission to conduct an airstrike on August 24th, so 2 days before the attack. And it was denied because Admiral Vasily and Major General Donahue deemed it infeasible due to negative reaction from the Taliban. And just to back up there, we actually struck that exact same location on August 27th, the day after the bombing. And they did that to prevent a follow-on attack. And the ISIS operator that they killed there was the guy in charge of distributing suicide vests, planning suicide attacks, all of that. So you have to ask yourself, if we had simply conducted the attack on the 24th, instead of being worried about whatever the Taliban thought, then there's a good chance we might have been able to prevent it. But the last thing is that the day before the attack, the military intelligence officials tracked ISIS-K to a hotel. It was 2 to 3 kilometers west of the airfield. And by the way, Jesse, this is all in the Pentagon's own documents. These are all sworn statements. They're transcribed interviews. They're in the Pentagon's own reports. Jerry and I were just the first people to dig through thousands of pages and find them. But the day before the attack, they were staged at a hotel 2 to 3 kilometers west of the airfield. And because we were relying on the Taliban, Major General Donahue asked the Taliban to raid that location. And of course, the Taliban didn't. The rest is history. And,
Jerry, for people who aren't as aware as you two are about the military, like what James just said there can be such a culture shock, such a shock for them when they hear Admiral this, General that, wouldn't give permission, wouldn't say yes. Can you please explain to the American who's sitting there stunned exactly what goes on in the higher levels of America's military leadership? It's not the people on the ground. What goes on with these freaking people?
Yeah, I mean, it is stunning, right? And, I was in the room yesterday when those Gold Star families were testifying, and their stories, I mean, they're heartbreaking. And part of why they're so heartbreaking is that they're so true. And as James just explained, this Abbey Gate attack, you know, it was not inevitable, as the Biden administration is trying to say. And, you know, one other thing was that Marine Sergeant Tyler Vargas Andrews was a Marine sniper at HKIA during the evacuation. He said that in the lead up to the attack, he was receiving not just detailed intelligence about the attack incoming, likely that day, almost down to the hour that the attack happened, but he also received descriptions of the likely suicide bomber. And he and his sniper team believed that they had identified the likely suicide bomber, had him in their sights, asked their commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Brad Whitted, for permission to take the shot. And according to Tyler, this commanding officer told Tyler that he, as the commanding officer, didn't have permission to give Tyler permission to take the shot, and he didn't know who did. And I think a lot of this goes back to the U.S. military leadership having to rely on the Taliban, because the decisions that Biden had made essentially meant that with giving up Bagram and then with the Taliban taking over the whole country, our presence was stuck in just this tiny airport. That's all that we controlled. And so all of these requests from U.S. service members on the ground and from U.S. military officers or intelligence officers who may have wanted to raid ISIS-K locations or take strikes against ISIS-K locations, the U.S. military leadership was having to take into account how the Taliban would respond, because we were essentially, because of the position that Biden had put us in, we were essentially at the mercy of the Taliban if we wanted to continue to try to get Americans and Afghan allies out. So this was an insane way to do an evacuation, and it was ultimately a dangerous and a deadly one.
James, can you explain why it's harder to secure a civilian airport than it is a place like Bagram? And I say that because I realize your military experience is limited because you were in the Army and not Marines, but you do understand at least a little bit about security. In all seriousness, why is it a big deal to give up Bagram? Why can't you just secure the local airport? And what's different about Bagram? What's the problem?
You know, I'm glad you asked that, because I think in a lot of these conversations, everyone just talks about, oh, we gave up Bagram, that was awful, but nobody actually explains it. And so I'm glad you asked. So for context, for your viewers, Bagram is a massive installation with dozens of runways. It's built for exactly the kind of evacuation that we would be conducting. In fact, it was built by the Soviets when they were in Afghanistan. And there's plenty of standoff distance. There's open fields all around, in which you can, prevent anyone from breaching the gates. But on top of that, we had all of these platforms, all of these, different, unmanned aerial assets. We had, jets and all of that, which we could have used to prevent the Taliban from taking Kabul. We couldn't have probably used it to prevent them from taking a lot of the country, but we could have kept basically a radius around Kabul and Bagram where we could have had an orderly evacuation. But the reason why that the airstrip, the single strip airstrip in Kabul was so dangerous was that it's in a dense urban environment. There are roads leading up to it from all sides. So it's really very difficult to secure. There's high ground on all sides, and we know that the Taliban had snipers overwatching the area the entire time the U.S. military was there. We know that they, because it was such a small fixed location, they were able to range their mortars in. So if they wanted to conduct a mortar attack against the U.S., they could have, and the U.S. troops knew that. So it really was the least defensible position we possibly could have taken. And what I want to emphasize, Jesse, is that U.S. military commanders told that to President Biden. President Biden was told that unequivocally. In fact, believe it or not, when the Obama administration conducted a feasibility analysis of an evacuation, They looked into whether or not it was possible to do it from the Kabul airport, and they concluded that it was just a non-starter because people were going to get hurt. Joe Biden threw all of that out the window, and the results speak for themselves.
Jerry, I'm going to ask you a question you may not be able to answer, but you guys wrote the friggin' book on it, so maybe you're the perfect one to ask. Why? What James just said, look, even if you accept, as I have, that Joe Biden doesn't have any patriotism or any of that, you at least would know that politically it's bad if your troops get killed. So why would you make, even if you're a soulless monster who doesn't care about their lives, why would you make such a strategic decision, especially when you have guys with a bunch of ribbons and medals on their chests, even though they're officers and they didn't earn most of them? They're telling you it's a bad idea. Why?
I mean, it is befuddling. Joe Biden developed a huge chip on his shoulder against the generals and military leadership generally when he was Obama's vice president, because they basically just ignored him for 8 years. And so I think that he came into his presidency with a chip on his shoulder related to the military leadership. I also think that Biden really wanted to make his mark on the war in Afghanistan. If you'll recall, he was pretty much the only person in Obama's inner circle who advised against the raid that killed Osama bin Laden. So he got that wrong. He was ignored with all the other advice that he gave related to Afghanistan when Obama was president. I just think he wanted to make his mark. And you can kind of see that with the date that he picked for the final U.S. withdrawal, right? Because in April 2021, he announced we're leaving immediately. And oh, by the way, sidebar, we have no plan about how to get Americans out, no plan about how to get the tens of thousands of Afghan allies out. But he picked the 20th anniversary of 9/11 for that final troop withdrawal date. Now, why would he pick a day like that? I think maybe he wanted some sort of victory lap. He wanted something that he could say he did on the 20th anniversary. But what that meant is that he makes the announcement in April. The final troop withdrawal date is September 11th. That's the spring and summer, which the United States knows, and anyone that's fought in Afghanistan knows that that is the middle of Afghan fighting season. That is when the Taliban ramps up. That's when the snow melts. Taliban could start moving in from Pakistan into Afghanistan. That is when the fighting is the strongest. It starts to heat up in the spring. It's real hard fighting in the summer and a little bit into the fall. And by picking that date and by having no plan about doing all of the other things that we would need to do if we wanted to do a safe and smart evacuation, what he actually ensured is that by the 20th anniversary of 9/11, the Taliban, the guys who harbored al-Qaeda before 9/11 and after 9/11, the Taliban were back in charge on the 20th anniversary.
Yeah. The book is Kabul. Please go pick it up. Read about your government. Honor those who fell. Jerry, James, appreciate you boys. Begin.
Hey,
Anytime.
Thank you very much.
Jesse, really appreciate it, man.
I have great news. If you enjoyed that, I have a YouTube channel you can subscribe to. Whatever I do, it'll be right there on YouTube. So go subscribe today.